Horror is an interesting genre, whether it's in movies, books, or etc. The purpose is to scare the viewers or creep in the minds of others. Different types of horror like slasher and gore to psychological horror, but never really meant for children. It's mostly, if not all movies, were aimed for an adult demographic. But there was an author who created a series that scared and made horrific tales for children. Alvin Schwartz was born on April 25, 1927 in Brooklyn, New York. His father was taking New Yorkers around as a taxi driver. While in the Navy, he wrote in his notebook. Later, he got his bachelor's from Colby College in 1944 to 45. He was engrossed with the idea of journalism. He then retrieved his master's in Northwestern University in 1949. After gathering his equipment, he planned to become a newspaper reporter for 4 years. On August 7, 1954, he was married to Barbara Carmer, who was as a learning disability specialist. He later quit his job as a newspaper reporter and had some few jobs. He was a writer for a nonprofit organization to a professor at Rutgers University at New Brunswick, New Jersey, 1962. In the next year, he was also publishing books as a freelance writer and children's book author. His first published book was created in 1963, A Parent's Guide to Children's Play and Recreation, a guide for parents to help their children knowing from his experience for taking care of 4 children, John, Peter, Nancy, and Elizabeth. At this time, he was working and writing short stories until 1972. He published his first series of books, A Twister of Twists, A Tangler of Tongues. It was a book with a collection of tongue twisters and illustrations by Glenn Rounds. Glenn Rounds was an author and an illustrator. He had a lot of experience after 6 decades of writing stories and drawing, making over 100 books. A Twister of Twists, A Tangler of Tongues was positive by readers and critics, described by a New York Times reviewer as one of the most delightful books that I've ever came across in years. So much positive reception that it became the bestseller book in 1972. He later made more books in this series. For example, Tomfoolery is a book about funny jokes, wordplay, and folklore. Another is a book, Cross Your Fingers and Spit in Your Hat, a book about superstition and other beliefs. With all of this success and appreciation of the books, he thought of an idea that will change everything, and soon did turn. On October 14, 1981, the book was published, Scary Stories That Are Told in the Dark. It was written by Alvin Schwartz and was illustrated by Stephen Gammell. It was until the early 90s where the book was surfaced to popularity and then became a controversy. Discussing of what's safe for children, parents did complain about the book being horrific and unsuitable. Sandy Vandenberg was an elementary teacher and mother and said to the Chicago Tribune, "The bad guy always wins. They make light of death. There's a story called Just Delicious, a woman who goes to a mortuary, steals another woman's liver, and then feeds it to her husband. That's sick." It was so severe that the parents were very concerned about Alvin Schwartz's mental health and was connecting to serial killers called The Wonderful Sausage, a tale that's about a butcher that grounds civilians and sells them to other people to feed unexpected people. Jean Jaworski, a mother of a 5th grade child, asked the school board to remove the book from schools and libraries. They did not take down the books because a majority did vote to keep it in. American Library Association, or ALA for short, in the list of banned books for 2 decades. 1990 through 1999 was number 1, and the 2000s to 2009 dropped to number 7, but is still in top 10. ALA's reasoning for the bans were insensitivity, violence, and being unsuitable for the age group, With all the media kicking and bashing, with all the criticisms of the book not being for children, and the multiple bans of books, Alvin Schwartz shrugged it off. In the Lion and Unicorn interview with the author, he stated, "My editors deal with them. Every letter is answered, and the point is made that this is traditionally material and that, in addition, it has developed a lot of interest in the reading. Also clearing that the point of the book is to scare. So, is this really scary? Let's take a look. That may catch the attention of readers is the cover. The black borders and the font makes it very strange until you see the picture in the middle. A disturbing picture of a clown head connecting to the ground like roots of a plant. The stories were based on folklore and other tales. For example, the story The Hook is an urban legend of a man with the hook as a hand and is killing couples in the parking lot. The legend started at the mid-1950s, but did get its popularity from the 1960s. Another example, back to the Wonderful Sausage story. The story wasn't from a particular folklore, but was from a song. Dunderbeck was found printed in the 19th century America.
Dunderbeck, oh Dunderbeck, how could you be so mean to ever have invented the sausage meat machine? Now all the rats and pussycats will never more be seen. They've all been ground to sausages in Dunderbeck's machine.
I've decided to read one of the short stories. It got hot in the valley. Thomas and Alfred drove their cows up in a cold, green pasture in the mountain to the glades. Usually they stayed there with the cows in 2 months. Then they brought them down to the valley again. The work was easy enough, but it was boring. All day the two men tended their cows. All night they went back to the tiny hut they live in. They eat supper and work in the garden and went to sleep. It was always the same. Then Thomas has an idea that will change everything. "Let's make a doll, the size of a man," he said. "It would be fun to make, and they could put it into the garden to scare away the birds." "It should look like Harold," Alfred said. Harold was a farmer they both hated. They made a doll out of the old sacks, stuffed with straws. They gave it a pointy nose like Harold and tiny eyes like his. They added dark hair and a twisted frown. Of course, they also gave Harold's name. Each morning, their way to the pasture, they tied Harold to a pole in the garden to scare away the birds. Each night, they brought him inside so they wouldn't get ruined if it rained. When they were feeling playful, they would talk to him. One of them might say, "How are vegetables growing today, Harold?" And the other, making believe he was Harold, would answer in a crazy voice, "Very slowly." They both would laugh, but not Harold. Whenever something went wrong, they would take it out on Harold. They would curse at him, even kick him and punch him. Sometimes one of them would even get the food that they would eat, which they both were sick of, and smear it on the doll's face. "How do you like the stew, Harold?" he would ask. "Would better eat it or else." Then the two men would howl in laughter. One night after Thomas has wiped Harold's face with the food, Harold grunted. "Did you hear that?" "It was Harold. It was Harold," Thomas said. "I was watching him when it happened. I can't believe it. How could he grunt? He's just a sack of straws. It's not possible." "Let's throw him into the fire," said Thomas. "That will be that." "Let's not do anything stupid," said Alfred. "We don't know what's going on. When we move the cows down, we'll leave him behind. For now, let's just keep our eyes on him." So they left Harold sitting in the corner of the hut. They didn't talk to him or take him outside anymore. And now the dog grunted, but that was all. After a few months, they decided there's nothing to be afraid of. Maybe a mouse or some insects had gotten inside Harold, and they were making these sounds. So Thomas and Alfred went back to the old ways. Each morning they put Harold out in the garden, and each night they brought him back into the hut. When they felt playful, they joked around with him. When they felt mean, they treated him as badly as ever. Then one night, Alfred noticed something that frightened him. "Harold is growing," he said. "I was thinking the same thing too," Thomas said. "Maybe it's just our imagination," Alfred replied. "We have been up here in the mountain too long." The next morning, while they were eating, Harold stood up and walked out of the hut. He climbed up on top of the roof and was trotting back and forth like a horse on his hind legs. All day and night he would trottle like that. In the morning, Harold climbed down and stood in the far corner of the pasture. The men had no idea what he would do next. They were afraid. They decided to take the cows down into the valley that same day. When they left, Harold was nowhere in sight. They felt as if they escaped a great danger and began joking and singing, but they were gone, only in a mile or two, and they realized it, and they forgot to bring the milking stools. Neither one of them wanted to go back, but the stools would cost a lot to replace. "There's really nothing to be afraid of," they told one of each other after one. After all, what could a doll do? They drew straws to see which one will go back. "It's Thomas. I'll catch up with you," he said, and Alfred walked on towards the valley. When Alfred came to the rise in the path, he looked back for Thomas. He didn't see him anywhere, but he did see Harold was on the roof again. As Alfred watched, Harold kneeled and stretched out a bloody skin to dry in the sun. But the most memorable part of the book were the illustrations. Stephen Gammell drew the illustrations in the book using a technique with ink splatters, making very interesting shapes and sizes. With time and skill, you can make very detailed works with this style. He did achieve making these unsettling and uncanny artworks. The second book, More Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, came out and was published at Halloween, October 31st, 1984. The series was ended at Scary Stories 3, More Tales to Chill Your Bones. It was published at September 1st, 1991. Alvin Schwartz sadly did pass away at the age of 64 from lymphoma in 1992, a year after the third book. Years passed. The 30 years anniversary of the Scary Stories, they decided to create a remake of the Scary Stories that are told in the dark. All of the artwork was later reprinted with the illustrations from Brent Hillquist, who illustrated the series of unfortunate events. His artwork is amazing, no doubt. His style is very clean and vibrant, but that can also be a flaw. According to some critics and readers, list makers on the internet started to claim the same issue. Websites like BuzzFeed started to say that they're ruining the series in lit reactions, making a list 18 most egregious art replacements. Considering that the old artwork was rough and unsettling, the artwork was unnatural and was very skin crawling. It wasn't the same as the old artwork. People did later found great appreciation of the artworks and did came back in later years. Alvin Schwartz would never think of a better way to pass on the stories. The stories was later made as collections. The two artists did become very well known, and the books will be adapted to film and a documentary under the same name. It doesn't seem that the books will ever die out. The stories are very interesting. The illustrations are beautifully creepy. Alvin and Stefan were very dedicated to making this idea come to life and will live like the folklore before it. Thank you all for watching the video. There are links in the description for the trailer of the documentary, as well as both the movie and the documentary's Twitter page. You all have a good night, and as always, stay dead. Liz was working on her homework on the dining room table. Sarah, her little sister, is upstairs sleeping. Her mother is out somewhere, but will come in any minute. She did heard something in the front door, that the front door opened. "Hello, Mama." There was no answer. She heard footsteps, but it didn't sound like her mother. These footsteps sounded heavy like a man. "Who's there?" There's no reply. The footsteps continues up the stairs and was wandering around in the bedrooms. Liz called out again, "Who's there?" The footprints stopped. Very scared, she knew that Sarah is sleeping alone up there. Oh no. She quickly ran up and opened to Sarah's room. Very hesitant, but still opened the door. Sarah is still sleeping. She looked at every bedroom, but no one was there. Liz went downstairs, scared out of her wits, came down the stairs. It went through the kitchen and went between the kitchen and the dining room and opened the other door. And it began to open. "Get out!" she screamed. The door closed. It went back to the kitchen, went into the front, and opened into the front door. It closed the front door. She went into the front window, but no one was there. Nobody in sight. And the snow in front of the house was untouched. There was no footprints onto the clean snow outside.